Welcome back to our next lecture on the topic of circular economy. Today we're going to talk about a special flavor of the circular economy, which is called the performance economy. And instead of selling products, as you would do in the linear or circular economy, you are suddenly selling results. Sounds a little bit unusual, but it's quite straightforward. So think about the example of a drilling machine. If you own a drilling machine, you probably don't own the drilling machine because you would like to have a drilling machine. You probably own a drilling machine because every now and then you need to drill a hole. So you're not really interested in the drilling machine, you want drilled holes. And instead of selling you a drilling machine, in the performance economy, a business or a company would offer you drilled holes. So you're just paying per drilled holes. And if your business model is suddenly selling as many holes as possible instead of selling as many drilling machines as possible, that has some interesting implications. For example, if you are a company that right now sells drilling machines, you don't want them to last forever, because once you have sold a drilling machine, there is no money to be made for you anymore. But if you are suddenly running your shop where you're selling holes, where you have your own drilling machines, you have a high incentive that those drilling machines are constructed in such a way that they last really, really long. And not that they are only very long lasting, but you're also interested in making them easy to repair, easy to replace certain components. So we're suddenly not talking about iPhones anymore that need to break every now and then, that are very difficult or even impossible to repair. We're suddenly talking about a complete different incentive system. So companies who have been previously just manufacturers of goods are now becoming those who are also using their goods. So it's a completely different setup in that system. And that also means that this liability border that we talked about before suddenly shifts away from the consumer to the producer, to the manufacturing companies. So the externalization of costs that you try to put on the user, that if something breaks, it's not your problem anymore as a producer, or if they cannot repair it anymore, or if it's really difficult to recycle it or to even dispose it, that's suddenly again the producer's problem. They have a high incentive to internalize this cost at a level that is super, super low. So suddenly they have an incentive to behave correctly. And what we've now tried to understand on the level of a simple product, you can also continue to break down onto lower levels. So instead of just selling the service or the result of a machine, you can also do that on the resource level. So you can imagine, or you can think of an example where suddenly you're not only buying resources, but instead you're renting them at the end. When you're done with your product and it has been recycled, you're giving the same amount of resources back to the entity where you got it from. So either selling the results of usable things, of services, or on the resource level where you can say, okay, we break this down to the level of renting a certain molecule of a certain resource. The result is for everything is the same. You try to suddenly keep everything as long as possible in the loop because you have a financial incentive, a corporate incentive, that if you keep it as long as possible in the loop, to make as much money as possible. So as usual, besides the explanation using examples, we also have a proper definition for you. And Walter Stachel gives in his book a really good definition of the performance economy and defines it as follows. The performance economy sells results instead of objects. Its economic actors may be manufacturers of durable objects or fleet managers operating them. In both cases, they sell the use of these objects as a service over the longest possible period of time and maximize their profits by exploiting both efficiency and sufficiency solutions. So don't sell as much things as possible anymore, rather sell them as often as possible, or more precisely what they are doing to exploit those sufficiency and efficiency solutions. And Stachel further argues that the performance economy is, in the context of the circular economy, the most sustainable business model because it forces the manufacturers or producers to internalize the costs of product liability, of risk and waste, and it offers those manufacturers a very strong incentive to prevent losses and waste. So essentially everything that they once pushed to the user or consumer as a problem, they now have to take care of themselves, and suddenly they behave the way that you imagine. It also maximizes the profit that they make by exploiting sufficiency, efficiency, and system solutions. And in addition, by maintaining the ownership of the objects that they produce, as well as the embodied resources, it creates a long-term corporate for the producers and manufacturers, as well as a national resource security at low cost, because the resources that you once have extracted and used in a product, you don't throw away anymore. Instead, you try to get them back at the highest purity, the most quantity, and so on, so that you don't lose them anymore. That means you already have them, you never lose them again, which is complete opposite of what we had in the linear economy before. So now that we've talked about the linear economy, the circular economy, as well as the performance economy, let's put all of them in one big picture. So let's start on the left side of this figure. We have the resources that have been extracted, then you use them to manufacture a certain good, and later those goods are used, and at some point some kind of waste occurs. So this is like very much what you know from the linear economy. So this is essentially the big square. Then you have the circle, the larger circle, which is supposed to represent the circular economy. So the circular economy essentially starts where the manufacturing process left off, or this is where the most overlap happens, because from there on, you try to keep the manufactured goods in the cycle for as long as possible by, first of all, maximizing the utilization of those products, then trying to repair and share them for as long as possible, reuse them in different processes, and only after those things are not possible, when we are in this third cycle of the circular economy figure that I showed you before, then you're going to the recycle and recover option, which is then essentially tying it back to the earlier stages of the linear economy, but you try to avoid having to extract new resources. So you're essentially just going back to the start of the linear economy square. And within the circular economy, you have this specific extra flavor, the performance economy that we talked about, where you have local uses focused performance economy services or actions happening. If you think about it, a performance economy is often local. I don't want to say it's always the case, but if you want drilled holes, you don't order drilled holes from China. You order them on a local level. If you think about other results that can be sold to you as a service, they also have a local context most likely. It doesn't have to be, but it's highly likely. So this is why we're often talking about local use-focused performance economy. And this is how we put linear economy, circular economy, and performance economy in one big figure. To briefly summarize this lecture series, so we talked about the linear economy, what is it? And in short, you can just say it's take, make, dispose, which is not really sustainable. An alternative model could be the so-called circular economy, where you try to maintain value and utility as high as possible for as long as possible. And we also talked about a special sub-flavor of the circular economy, which is called the performance economy, where instead of selling objects, you sell results.